Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Ayes and welcome to my YouTube channel. Have you ever been excited for a video game only for the hype to be inflated after the game's launch? I know I have. Although I have not personally played it, I remember when No Man's Sky was announced and a plethora of promises were made. Procedurally generated planets, opportunities to meet other players in the vast emptiness of space, interesting planets to explore. Again, I have not experienced it for myself, but I have read several reviews, and there seems to be a consensus that the anticipation for No Man's Sky was met with disappointment and understanding that the goals by the developers were not met. The same can be said about Fallout 76. I will include a video in the comment section by Angry Joe if you would like to explore the reasons as to why Fallout 76 was a letdown. The lesson from this introduction acknowledges the necessity to keep our expectations in check whenever a product is released. However, it is very hard in some situations. I am expecting Callisto Protocol and the Dead Space remake to blow me away, and I will sigh in disbelief if they end up being mediocre or underwhelming. In today's video, I will talk about 10 video games that made my heart rate go up and forced a smile on my face before I had my hands on them, but gave me no choice but to facepalm as I played them. Before we proceed, we need to set up some ground rules. First, the upcoming picks are rated from the least overhyped game to the most overhyped game, naturally. Secondly, the only eligible video games are ones that I have played. Therefore, No Man's Sky and Fallout 76 will not be a part of the countdown. Thirdly, I'm not saying that any of the following picks are bad per se. In fact, I have enjoyed most of them to a certain extent. Keep this point in mind in particular. Lastly, this list will obviously be subjective. If there are different games on your list or you think any of the following games are not overhyped, please let me know in the comment section and we will discuss them. Without further ado, let's rank the top 10 most overhyped games that I have ever played. Number 10, Soma. If you ask anyone to name a game that is visually similar to Soma, they will probably pick out BioShock. My favorite title in the franchise is BioShock Infinite, but the first BioShock, which resembles the most to Soma, was fantastic. The atmosphere was second to none, the gameplay was a ton of fun, and that twist. If you know, you know. When I first aimed my sight on the number 10 spot on this list, I was pretty excited, and my anticipation went through the roof. I managed to sit down and give it a try a year or two ago, only to find out that it only touches the surface that makes the BioShock series truly special. It certainly has elements of horror, as these unknown creatures chase you and can end your run if you're not too careful. At the same time though, it transformed Soma into a game of cat and mouse, and it killed any interest that I had with regards to exploring the environments and trying to understand the lore behind it. The annoyingly slowed down sections at sea did not increase the title's chance to impress me at all. Soma is tolerable if you're a fan of games such as Amnesia: The Dark Descent. As far as I'm concerned, the comparison between Soma and BioShock is identical to a comparison between Adam's Venture and Uncharted. The former does not come close to the latter. Number 9, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. When I was a kid, my dad introduced me to Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. The original title was punishingly difficult and required precise tactics to overcome. Nonetheless, it was a combination of the sense of fulfillment with the knowledge that every death was completely entirely your fault made me love the game and a couple of its sequels. I also enjoyed Rainbow Six Vegas 1 and 2, even though they did not require the strategy that the original did. In comes Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. Its first gameplay footage gave me hope that the series has returned back to formula. Alas, it was not the case. Well, not completely. If you are willing to put the time and dedication into learning the mechanics, as well as playing with a consistent and decent group of players, there aren't many multiplayer games that are on the same playing field as Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege. Sadly, I could not bring myself to gain any satisfaction from it. Playing online is way too challenging for beginners, and the offline offerings are not compelling at all. I will give you some context as to why I prefer the original Rainbow Six over Rainbow Six Siege. In the original Rainbow Six, you can carefully plan every squad's route and freely switch between them once the mission starts. In Rainbow Six Siege, you are limited to using a camera to target foes prior to taking control of your single target and doing what you need to do to accomplish your mission. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege is an incredible multiplayer title. It is that game though that makes me wish that I could go back in time and play 1998's Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Number 8. Crysis. The original Crysis was the game that many people hyped as a way to test the true capabilities of your own computer. If you did not have a top-of-the-line GPU, CPU, and RAM, it was unlikely that you could play Crysis. The way in which PC users in particular held this game in high regards gave me hope that Crysis will not only fulfill their wish, but also announce to the world that it is a great game in general. It has potential, there's no denying it. The opportunity to play as a super soldier and decimate your foes with multiple abilities is enticing. Sadly, the end product was a disappointment, especially since my first Crysis game was its sequel, a far better experience. The original Crysis is plagued by a lackluster soundtrack, repetitive gameplay, and a story that, quite frankly, bored me to tears. In my recent video about From Software, I mentioned that a game's narrative is its most important aspect for me, and the visuals are the least important feature. If anything positive came out of my experience with Crysis, it will be its confirmation that my ranking of a game's aspects is solid and to the point. Number 7. The Last Guardian. Although it made me rage towards its end, Shadow of the Colossus is one of my favorite remade games, and one that I wish I had played on the PlayStation 2. The concept of defeating giant creatures that are basically at peace with the world around them created a sense of inner conflict that I have not felt in a very long time. In 2009, the makers of Shadow of the Colossus announced The Last Guardian, and many people were holding their breath in anticipation. After a series of delays, the hype grew exponentially. By the time the game was released in 2016, we were ready to give it a crack and see if the makers of Ico and Shadow of the Colossus could create lightning in a bottle for the second time. It is hard for me to tell you that The Last Guardian did not live up to the hype that was set through years of anticipation. It was not because of the story, it was not because of the visuals. For me, it was because of your companion's AI. You control a young boy, but you also give commands to Trico, a giant creature that resembles a mystical dog. It is here where the issue arises. There is a 50% probability that he will not listen to you. Your character can ask him to jump on this platform, but he will simply do circles around the platform or not listen at all. There's a trophy in The Last Guardian that requires you to speedrun the title, and I cannot imagine how frustrating it must be to try and even earn it. The Last Guardian decided to stray away from a boss gauntlet experience and focus on an adventure starring a boy and his companion. That risk, at the end of the day, did not pay off. Number 6. LA Noire. At first glance, LA Noire seemed like an average detective game. In hindsight, it is just that. You play as a detective and you try to solve increasingly difficult criminal cases while also learning to deal with mistakes from your past. None of what I said would make anyone ecstatic for it. With that being said, there is a feature that stole everyone's attention from similar games in the genre: the facial animations. Using the perpetually advancing technology that was available for its time, the developers behind LA Noire created an AI that utilizes the enhanced facial animations to keep you on your toes as you bring each suspect to the interrogation room and try to find the truth behind each crime. In that aspect, I respect LA Noire, and it is that technological achievement, combined with my interest in TV shows like Law & Order Special Victims Unit, that encouraged me to give that title a whirl. Do you remember at the beginning of this pick, when I said that LA Noire appeared to be nothing more than an average detective game? Well, I reached the same conclusion by the time the credits roll. Outside of the facial animations, there isn't really anything special about LA Noire. The protagonist is likable, sure, but the gameplay is monotonous, particularly when you drive a car or run after a suspect. I'm glad that I played LA Noire, but I will not lie. One of my Twitch viewers asked me to replay it. It did not take me a long time to reject that idea, or at the very least, postpone it to a few years from now. Number 5. Far Cry 4. Far Cry New Dawn is my favorite entry in the series right now, but Far Cry 3 held that spot for a very long time. The gameplay was what you have come to expect from a first-person shooter in a Ubisoft-created environment. The frame rate was choppy at times, but they did not break the game. What made Far Cry 3 a must-play video game, in my opinion, was the first villain you encounter in the game, Vaas. I do not want to give away too much because I would like to do a top 10 antagonists in gaming video, but Vaas will absolutely be on that list because he's an unpredictable foe that is masterfully voiced by Michael Mando.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
When Far Cry 4 was revealed, I was curious to see if the villain would live up to the hype of Vaas. The first cutscene gave me hope. Exceptionally voiced by Troy Baker, Pagan Min was the main obstacle for the protagonist, and he was menacing, charismatic, and ruthless. Regrettably, he was barely in the game. Once you escape his palace, you rarely see him. It is only at the end of the game when you make a critical choice and interact with Pagan Min. It is even more of a letdown than the revelation that Vaas was not the ultimate villain of Far Cry 3. And it immediately cemented Far Cry 4's status as the worst version of Far Cry 3. Far Cry 4 is still a decent entry in the franchise. I enjoyed it a whole lot more than Far Cry Primal. Nonetheless, the anticipation of Far Cry 4 based on the quality of Vaas's performance in Far Cry 3 deflated after the first hour or so in the Ubisoft created environment. Number 4. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. My experience with the Dragon Ball Z Budokai trilogy has been interesting to say the least. I played Dragon Ball Z Budokai back when it launched, and I fell in love with it. I have been a huge fan of the anime for as long as I can remember, and the recreated cutscenes and the combat systems were fantastic. After the original Budokai's launch, I skipped the sequel because I did not own a platform that could play it. Instead, I tried Budokai 3 at my friend's place several years later, and it became my favorite Dragon Ball Z game of all time from that point onward. Naturally, I wanted to play the game that came between Budokai and Budokai 3. As it so happened, I was able to give it a go on my GameCube, and the combat system, the visuals, and the soundtrack did not decimate my hype. It is the story mode, sadly, that made it the worst in the trilogy. Whereas Budokai 1 provided cutscenes and Budokai 3 gave us a world layout with secrets that you can find, Budokai's 2 story mode took place on a game board. I'm not joking. It was literally a game board. I know it may be a small issue for you, but it was a big deal for me. I watched the reveal trailer in the early 2000s, and I thought Budokai 2 would have the same features but include the Buu Saga, better visuals, and more characters. I guess I should not have hyped myself as much as I did. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 is a good fighting game, but it does not measure up to its prequel or its sequel. Number 3. Cyberpunk 2077. We have all heard the sad story that is Cyberpunk 2077, but let me give you some personal perspective. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is one of my favorite video games of all time. As a matter of fact, it is on my list of top 10 best games ever. The story, the characters, the side quests, the gameplay, the visuals, and the soundtrack are all superb. It may not come as a surprise to you then that I was anticipating and eager to get my hands on Cyberpunk 2077. When the game came out after a few clearly necessary delays, I saw its potential. Moreover, I saw a glimpse of another one of my favorite games, the original Deus Ex on the PC. The gunplay was fun, the story was intriguing and included multiple endings, the music was magnificent, and the voiceovers were great. Put Keanu Reeves in any video game and I am immediately sold. Therefore, why was this game overhyped for me? It was the plethora of technical issues. I wish that I had footage on my second playthrough, but there was a clear difference between the quality of my first playthrough and the quality of my second playthrough, both of which were played on the PlayStation 5. Based on the first playthrough, I was ready to give Cyberpunk 2077 a 10 out of 10. It only took me 10 minutes into my second playthrough to lower the score to a 2 out of 10. If that decrease does not prove to you how overhyped Cyberpunk 2077 was for me, I do not know what will. Bugs, glitches, and fidelity that made the title less playable than a game from the Nintendo Entertainment System broke the game for me. Cyberpunk could have easily been the most overhyped game that I've ever played, but there is a certain reason in the next 2 entries that placed them on top of this list. Number 2. Ghost of Tsushima. Certainly the most controversial pick on this list, Ghost of Tsushima's placement needs to be discussed with an asterisk. In my opinion, Ghost of Tsushima is the best samurai feature game that I've ever played. The presentation is arguably better than anything that the PlayStation 4 has ever dished out. The gameplay is solid and incorporates multiple combat stances. The voice acting, especially with the added Japanese dub, is great. The story is good and provides a clear end goal for the protagonist. I love Ghost of Tsushima and I would recommend it to anyone. Needless to say, I still think it is overhyped. Why? I will tell you, but I will not go into too much detail due to spoilers. Prior to Ghost of Tsushima's release, a certain PlayStation 4 exclusive title was slandered before its release date due to the reveal of specific plot points. The game in question is The Last of Us Part 2. The reason why I put Ghost of Tsushima on this list is because I believe Ghost of Tsushima received an extra boost of hype because some gamers were mad at the narrative direction that Neil Druckmann decided to implement in the continuation of Joel's and Ellie's journey. A few of the previous entries on this list were more overhyped than Ghost of Tsushima, but I placed Sucker Punch's latest video game at the number 2 spot because of the ridiculous reason as to why some people may have hyped Ghost of Tsushima more than it deserved. Number 1, Destiny. One of the most influential first-person shooters series is Halo. Starring Master Chief, you are tasked with stopping destruction on the galactic scale by destroying a ring-shaped weapon called Halo. The campaigns are fun and can be emotional at times, while the multiplayer component is a blast through and through. The original trilogy was created by a company called Bungie, and gamers were concerned when the company announced that they are passing the Halo torch to a different company in order to focus on new projects. The biggest project post-Halo from Bungie was Destiny. It was advertised as an online-only experience that will last for years and years to come. It was hyped to high heaven. It was led by the team that brought us Halo 1, 2, and 3, and its potential was seemingly endless. I picked it up at launch and sunk over 100 hours into it. I'm not gonna lie, I had fun with it. The gameplay was as addicting as the Halo series, and the concept of always seeking better loot brought me back on a daily basis. As a whole, it does not sound too bad. At a closer look, Destiny begins to fall apart and mark itself as a dirty stain on the reputation of a company that brought us Master Chief, Cortana, and 343 Guilty Spark. Repetitive missions, a game that becomes unplayable in the presence of internet issues. Stories painfully generic and requires research for further context. The final boss is mysteriously terrible. Bungie hyped up Destiny after insinuating that it is a more important and worthwhile task than continuing the adventures of Master Chief and Cortana in Halo. Although it is not the worst video game I've ever played, its lackluster nature guaranteed that it will be the most overhyped game that I've ever played. Well folks, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for checking it out. Which video game in your opinion received way too much hype for its own good? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Till next time, have a great day or evening wherever you are. My name is AES, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.